we're going to see Bitcoin go on a historic tear. It's going to outperform all of the other assets, and it's going to do it in an unprecedentedly public way. We're really going to see the big price bump when we probably end the year at 50 grand. With a completely different regulatory environment, that means a lot more dollars can flow into Bitcoin. And that, I think, would break the diminishing returns theory. It's not long before MicroStrategy is going to be included in, for example, the S&P 500.
Do you have fear of a 6102 type of thing?
So I do think that...
Mr. Pierre Rochard, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Brandon.
So we're having a lively discussion offline here. You have spent thousands of hours studying Bitcoin and hundreds of thousands of hours living in that Bitcoin world and studying money. So I want you to walk the average person through this timeline of the last, we'll call it 15 years or so. So, anywhere from 13 to 17 years, just this last decade and a half of your journey, and what you've learned on this journey, but more importantly, not to rehash your story, but to, the gauntlet's not easy. And so, the person you've become and what you've received on this journey and what you are able now to see that the average person can't see because they don't understand Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very fortunate that in high school, I got interested in two topics, which at the time seemed very unrelated. One was free and open source software. So I was installing Linux on computers, being a nerd. The other was money and banking. So I got really interested in Austrian economics, 100% reserve, gold and silver. And so I thought these two hobbies of mine, while they were common in their nerdiness, were not interrelated in any way until 2012. End of 2012, I become friends with Michael Goldstein and Daniel Krawisz, and they start orange pilling me, teaching me about Bitcoin. I start looking it up online, looking at the Bitcoin Wikipedia, looking at the Bitcoin Talk Forum, and just trying to absorb as much information as I could, because when they told me that there would only be 21 million Bitcoin, it immediately clicked for me that this was going to grow to be bigger than gold. Because gold, there's no supply cap on gold. They keep mining more gold. And so even before I learned about Bitcoin, I did have this thought that wouldn't it be nice to have gold, but like they don't mine more gold. So already I had some kind of proto-Bitcoin thought in my head. I just never would have imagined that it would be possible with a digital system, because I always thought, it would be like World of Warcraft gold, right? Where it's a centralized server that issues the currency. And so there's not any scarcity that's possible in this new digital world. And I liked that from the open source perspective of like, hey, yeah, now we can replicate software ad infinitum. We're in a post-scarcity world. But Bitcoin flipped that on its head for sure.
What kind of person have you become? And I think the most important part of this is just the maturation process. And it's the Max guys are saying, I believe it's Max, at least he claims it's him, of you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And how has Bitcoin changed you? Because you were already a person that was going down these lines. Like you were already, obviously, like you just said, you're already going down this path. So what did Bitcoin help you see that you couldn't see from the fiat system, or you could call it maybe the precious metals, sound money world? What has Bitcoin illuminated for you that you couldn't otherwise see?
Yeah, so before Bitcoin, I thought that the only way that we would get to a better world would be through the collapse of the fiat system, where essentially you have such a huge hyperinflation that people are forced to go use gold and silver, and that it's a chaotic outcome that was just inevitable because of the incentives of governments to just print more and more money and for banks to make increasingly risky loans and get bailouts and all this. So I had a bleak outlook on the future that gold and silver would only win through the collapse of fiat, through the defeat of fiat. And then when Bitcoin came along, I realized that actually it can just win on its own merits. So it doesn't even need for fiat to collapse in order to succeed, because it's just better technology. So instead of Bitcoin being a life raft off of some kind of sinking ship, it's more of like, hey, we have a better ship. Would you like to hop on to the better ship? And that completely, I think, changed my perspective on life. And I think that, you know, the virtue of hope was one that I didn't live with before, and Bitcoin really imbued me with.
It really does change people. I know it's changed me in many ways. Have you thought about? I mean, I know you have, but what are your thoughts on? I'm going to transition a little bit to the suppression of price right now. It feels like there's suppression of price. What happens when governments start hoarding Bitcoin? As you full well know, you've been talking about this for over a decade. You are at the Texas legislature talking about this at the state level. I mean, the local municipalities. You can now have your city be funded by money from all over the world if you just hop onto a Bitcoin standard. It's pretty remarkable. When governments really start hoarding Bitcoin, which it looks like they are at every level, how is the price not moving? How we have all this bullish move and price is not correlating to what we're seeing?
Yeah, I'm very skeptical of accusations of manipulation for a few different reasons. One is that it's something that I always heard from gold people, that they felt like the gold price was being suppressed. But if we look now, like the gold price is hitting all-time highs. It's been in a bull market for the past 20 years. So it makes me scratch my head of, well, why were they suppressing it before? Why aren't they suppressing it anymore? Like, how does that narrative fit together over time? And then also on the Bitcoin side, whenever Bitcoin's gone up, I've always heard narratives that it's being manipulated, and that Tethers is actually propping up the price of Bitcoin. And so it seemed to me that there's always a narrative around, essentially the price not matching our expectations and us filling that gap with some kind of conspiracy. So that's where I'm very skeptical of any of the suppression or manipulation narratives. And then, of course, we can point to, for example, FTX. So in the previous bull market, you had people buy billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, or so they thought, at FTX, but it turned out that they were not buying any Bitcoin. So you could call that, paper Bitcoin, essentially. And there would be an argument to be made there that because of their money being defrauded, that Bitcoin price would have gone higher if they had actually bought Bitcoin. And so people say, oh, well, okay, couldn't that be happening today? I haven't really seen anything credible along those lines. I'll say that at the time with FTX, I did find it odd. I was working at Kraken, another exchange, and I found it odd how quickly they were growing, because an exchange doesn't really grow that quickly in an organic manner. I didn't think it was a complete fraud like it turned out to be. I did think Sam Bankman-Fried was a complete fraud, because every time I heard him talking, I thought to myself, this guy, he's sounds like a crook, and he's,
like word salad.
Yeah. So the other part of it too is that if we look at who is being accused of issuing paper Bitcoin, for example, like Coinbase, well, they're audited, and in my past life, I was a financial auditor, and so we can say, hey, look, Enron was audited, and yet it was a fraud. So who's to say Coinbase is not a fraud? Well, I just don't. I need to see serious evidence of it, because the evidence I've seen is that Coinbase does actually have the Bitcoin, and that when we think about why would the price be where it is today, I think there's three factors. Um, Bitcoin's a macroeconomic asset now, and the halvings that have historically caused bull markets, those halvings have less and less impact over time because they become a smaller and smaller percentage of the total supply. It's, I think, should not be surprising that the halving has not triggered as big of a bull market as it might have in the past. The other piece of that is where we are with regards to Bitcoin's number one competitor, which I consider to be the US dollar. So the US dollar competes against Bitcoin really on three dimensions. The first is interest rates. So on interest rates, because of the COVID inflation, interest rates had to go up. And so they brought them up to like 5% at the Fed. They've eased off a little bit on that, but nevertheless, I think that the relatively high interest rates compared to 0% not so long ago, that is causing a massive headwind for Bitcoin. So that to me is what's suppressing the price more than anything else is the interest rate. The second is obviously Trump's approach to managing the economy is to create some uncertainty around tariffs and to essentially use that as a mechanism for reducing the amount of speculative froth that had built up over the past few years under Biden, and to try to push inflation back to under or around 2%, where it was historically, and to push interest rates down as well, to circle back to the first point. And so I think that he wants to disinflate all the asset classes that are risk on. So that includes stocks, that includes Bitcoin. So I think that is really why the Bitcoin price is where it's at today. We also have to remember that there's lots of people who, when I was a college student discovering Bitcoin, I was in, all sorts of student loan debt. I was broke. There was no way I could buy, $10 million worth of Bitcoin and ride it up to where it is today. But there were lots of other people who were in that position. And so when you've held from $10 to $1,000, it makes sense to sell some Bitcoin to rebalance, maybe put your kids through college, pay off your mortgage, buy a Lambo, contribute to a charity. There's all sorts of good reasons to be able to realize those gains. And same thing, if you ride it from $1,000 to $100,000. And so this is the wealth effect. It's really funny to me when I hear people say that Bitcoiners don't spend their Bitcoin. They definitely do. Having worked at Kraken, I saw the massive amounts of Bitcoin that would get sold. It's just that they don't spend them directly for goods and services. Instead, they flip into dollars and then they flip into goods and services because guess what? The rest of the economy accepts dollars. So it's just, dollars have become a utility token that people hold for as little time as possible. But there's definitely that wealth effect that means that, with Bitcoin going from 17 grand, well, like 2 years ago, Bitcoin was at 17 grand. Now it's 4x. So that's a 400% return over 2 years. Yeah, people are going to take chips off the table. So I don't think that the price today is indicative of any kind of manipulation. If we were at $1,000 per Bitcoin, I would say, yeah, there's definitely some funny business going on. But here at 80 something, I think that it all makes sense.
Do you think that we're just prisoners of the moment in the sense of we hear all this news and a lot of it, we've just been pummeled with news so much over the last, it's only been a couple months really, right? I mean, I guess since the election, we'll call it. So it takes time for that stuff to actually happen and come to fruition as well. People think like, oh, I heard a bunch of news and then, we're going to be buying Bitcoin like crazy. But I mean, in reality, that's not how the machine works. I mean, it takes time for purchases, all these things to actually take place. So I'm sure that would probably be a fair amount of it as well, I'd imagine, correct?
Yeah, so there's this famous saying of buy the rumor, sell the news. And so leading into the Trump inauguration, people were buying the rumor of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Bitcoin went up to 100K. And then they sold the news, because at the end of the day, what Trump announced was not that on that day they were going to buy lots of Bitcoin. It was that they were not going to sell any Bitcoin. So I think that was already fully priced in, and that they were going to identify ways to buy Bitcoin in the future. And I think that will only get priced in when they actually buy the Bitcoin. And so then if we look at Saylor, for example, I think Saylor has been essentially buying Bitcoin in a relay race with the OGs who are selling to him. They're tired of holding for 10 years or 5 years or whatever they've been holding for.
Yep.
So they're handing the baton off to Saylor. And I think that people misunderstand what effect that has, because they think that Saylor owns 100% of MicroStrategy. That's not the case. There's lots of investors who own shares of MSTR and of the other financial instruments that he's issuing. And so strategy, I think, doesn't just represent one buyer. It represents literally millions of people who are buying Bitcoin through this vehicle. And even, if you look at the index funds, it's not long before MicroStrategy is going to be included in, for example, the S&P 500. And so to me, I think that's a great way to scale Bitcoin exposure to lots of people who, frankly, they just haven't done the research and the work to do it themselves. And so Saylor's doing them a huge favor by kind of foisting the Bitcoin onto them and saying, trust me, you'll be happy later on. So then if we look at the ETFs, they've been buying, but not a whole lot. I think a lot of it has just been redistribution from the old vehicle of GBTC that had high fees to the new ETF vehicles. So I think that we're really going to see the big price bump when the economy turns around and that the Trump administration turns on the liquidity spigots. And so once the money supply in terms of dollars starts increasing, we're going to see Bitcoin go on a historic tear. It's going to outperform all of the other assets, and it's going to do it in an unprecedentedly public way, where the ETFs and MSTR are just, doing percentages that equity investors are not used to seeing outside of the occasional NVIDIA or a Tesla, right? So then on top of that, when they start essentially momentum buying and going into these vehicles to buy more Bitcoin, this is where we see the beauty of Bitcoin, which is that no matter what the price does, they can't mine more Bitcoin. The mining gets cut in half every 4 years. So the Bitcoin price, I think, is really it's going to surprise a lot of people because of how inelastic it is. There's not more supply coming onto the market. So that's I think going to be in the second half of this year. So if I were to guess, I would say we probably end the year at 250 grand.
Yeah, I mean, I just interviewed Samson the other day, and we should be at 200 right now. Like, there's no way. What are your thoughts? I mean, he was talking about the China. We talked about FTX. It was one of the things he was talking about, and the China mining ban, stuff like that. And so he was saying just being at 80,000 is just it's hilarious. And so like it's funny because I see both sides. Like I agree with what you're saying. At the same time, I see what Samson's saying. It's and he's like, and the Omega candle's coming, and it's coming before 1 million. We're getting 100,000 a day, maybe two, maybe a couple before we get to 1 million. What do you see? So 250 by the end of the year, but what do you see in terms of, do we have that $100,000 rise in one day before 1 million, or does it come after, or how do you see that playing out?
It definitely could be before, but we have to keep in mind that while it is true that the Bitcoin price going up doesn't bring on more Bitcoin mining, in the sense that they're not going to be creating more Bitcoin out of thin air, it is going to attract more old hodlers who are going to, essentially be rebalancing again. And so I do think that there's a limit, a dampening effect as the price goes up that is going to bring more coins to the market. So I'm not as bullish on the big candles like Samson is. I think that what we're going to see is more just step functions. So essentially, over the course of 2 weeks, it goes up 15%, and then it goes sideways for a while. It has a correction, it goes down 10%, and then it does another step up. And so I think that it's going to continue to have that kind of pattern rather than one day it just goes up, 20 or 30%.
Do you, how would you describe yourself in the sense of, because I feel like it's a time frame, like a nuanced time frame thing, where some people could hear that and say, well, that's diminishing returns, Pierre, but I don't think that's, like, I don't hear that from you. I think people could misconstrue that, because I think, like, on a long enough time frame, it sounds like you're saying, hey, Bitcoin's going to just keep going up forever. It might not be super violent, it might be more orderly. Is that how you would maybe put it?
It is, yeah. I think that the diminishing returns, I'm torn on, because I understand the argument that at this point Bitcoin's a 1.5 trillion dollar asset, and so shouldn't you expect diminishing returns? But I also subscribe to the view that it is it's it can be misinterpreted in the sense that we have a limited amount of data. And so if we're just looking at the past 10 years of data, you're basically looking at a period of time where we had lots of dollar liquidity. And then over the past couple of years, it has tightened up. And so let's take a look at it over 50 years. I think you would need that amount of data to say diminishing returns. We could easily have oscillating returns of, okay, well, now we're last I checked, on a dollar cost averaging basis, we're basically a 20% annualized return. But that could be the low, and that it'll oscillate back up to 60% before then going back down to 20%, just depending on what the US dollar is doing in terms of monetary policy. And then wider policy as well. So, for example, what we're seeing is that after Biden tried to essentially create capital controls around Bitcoin so that financial institutions, banks would not touch Bitcoin and would separate themselves from the wider crypto industry, now we're seeing the opposite. So just today, as we're recording, the Don Jr. and Eric Trump announced that they're going into a Bitcoin mining venture. And all of the banking regulators are announcing that they're open for business when it comes to banking Bitcoin related businesses and exchanges and brokerages. So I think that with a completely different regulatory environment, that means a lot more dollars can flow into Bitcoin. And that, I think, would break the diminishing returns theory. And then people will be left scratching their heads of, okay, well, what does this mean? But I don't think we're going back to like 500% returns, right? Which is where Bitcoin was in the very early days. I think that's behind us. But if unless you're leveraged, right? So that's where we can talk about MicroStrategy of they have some amount of leverage where it does amplify the returns while also obviously amplifying the down draws in the bear market. So I think that's probably a way that people are going to continue to try to outperform Bitcoin by taking on leverage. And that means that they're going to be borrowing dollars. And so on the other end of that, that means that there's people who are going to be long Bitcoin in a way that is downside protected because the leveraged trader is providing the buffer for you from a capital perspective. And so for all the people who've been complaining about Bitcoin being too volatile, well, they're the perfect people to be lending dollars to leveraged traders.
Yeah. How do you see, this makes me think of, SOB 121, just the sell pressure, or maybe a lack of sell pressure is maybe the best way to say it, with the repeal of SOB 121, banks coming in and lending. Because if people can lend, if you can do this, the Japanese, yen carry trade, or the Hugo Stennis trade, or, in what Sailor's doing, I mean, whatever you want to call it, and you're borrowing in the crappy currency, and then you're holding the good currency, is that, it feels like the trade, right? Like that is the trade going forward. And it feels like it might be for a while, just because the people at the top, they love that trade. That's an amazing trade. I kind of want to run that for as long as I possibly can, to a large extent. No.
Yeah, I agree. And I see this as the end game. So in 2014, I wrote an article called Speculative Attack, which is exactly describing this dynamic. And it's how currencies compete on the global market. And so, as long as US dollar interest rates are lower than Bitcoin's returns, expected returns, then that carry trade makes sense. So, I think that it'll continue. Uh, it's an open question as to how this ends. I think that eventually it just makes sense to back the dollar with Bitcoin, and to say, okay, for each dollar out there, we have one Satoshi in Fort Nakamoto, which is our strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so we're going to have the dollar be 100% backed by Bitcoin. People might say, hey, look, like, isn't that just recreating the gold standard? Yes, it is, with a big caveat, which is that the Federal Reserve, when they were under the gold standard, they were only 40% collateralized. So for every dollar out there, 40% of it was in gold, 60% of it was in debt and credit. So here, what I'm saying is that if we have it be 100% backed, then we avoid a lot of the problems that plagued the gold standard. And then it's just a matter of political will. Do we have the political will to pass a constitutional amendment that says only balanced budgets, no more national debt? We played around with that and it burnt us. And so I think that that's the future I hope for my kids. I think that would really establish a level of prosperity that would be unprecedented in human history. So hopefully that's what we're working towards.
Do you think it was? I was talking to someone the other day. I don't know if it was Tony Yazbak or Samson or somebody, and they said the government, whatever exists of them someday, will make it illegal for you to mess with the Bitcoin network, because it will become of that level of money / strategic importance, et cetera, et cetera. Is that something you could foresee as well?
Arguably, it already is illegal. Broadly speaking, cyber criminal activity of hacking into other people's computers is already illegal. So then it's a matter of, okay, well, does that really matter with North Korea, right? That they're the ones who are hacking into exchanges and extracting it and laundering it through different mechanisms. So I don't know what the from a practical matter, what more they can do, other than saying, hey, look, we're going to be mining Bitcoin, so we're going to be providing some of the security around it. What would be great would be that they say, hey, look, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, we can actually be a part of your multisig. So we can help you with wallet recovery if needed. And that would be kind of a collaborative custody mechanism that some people might want. But yeah, that's an interesting idea.
I would love for you to unpack. Right before this, we were talking about the backing the dollar with Bitcoin. I would love for you to, because I can hear people yelling at us right now. Could you unpack that a little bit more of why? Because again, a lot of people, as you know, you've had so many debates that people haven't seen Pierre debate on stages or in virtual settings like this. Go do that. Just great education on both sides, not just Pierre, but the people he's talking to, some really smart people. So I would love for you to unpack that more, because I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners, again, as you know, thinking, hey, Bitcoin is going to be the only thing. We want it to be the only thing. This is what's going to diminish the size of government. Uh, how do you square that circle? How do you make that make sense for the person that's saying that right now?
Yeah, so I think that if you have dollars that are 100% backed by Bitcoin, Bitcoin is the only thing. And so take the win, because the alternative is to destroy the dollar. And then all the people who were dependent on that system are, essentially out of luck. And that I think that that causes far more societal problems than it solves. And so I think that as Bitcoiners, we have a responsibility to find a way to gracefully transition from the old world to the new, and take responsibility for other people who, frankly, they didn't have the foresight that we had, or they don't feel comfortable with computers, right? They're not like tech savvy, and we have to respect that, and we have to think about it big picture. What kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want one where essentially the government defaults on everybody who was counting on it, or do we want to find a way to recapitalize the government with Bitcoin and to start looking at, okay, how do we move away from a Ponzi scheme like Social Security and doing that in a responsible way rather than essentially destroying it, and all those people who had built up what they thought was a nest egg, but it was actually paying off the early retirees, that we can actually have a political system that helps everyone, rather than saying, okay, well, now it's survival of the fittest, and if you didn't see this coming, too bad. So all that, because I think that we're going to have the resources to do it. It would be something else if it was like,
if you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
Hey, look, like we're all going to be in survival mode, so there's no way that we can make this work. No, I think that first of all, the Bitcoin price, Bitcoin purchasing power is going to increase such that it's not really going to be, it's going to be a rounding error of helping everyone out. And then second of all is all the productivity gains from AI, right? We're going to have massive robot armies at our disposal to build the roads and to, develop infrastructure and all of this, that build housing, right? Like we don't have to have this scarcity mentality that, we have to destroy the government. Otherwise, people who are relying on it are going to continue to rely on it.
Is the dollar in essence UBI? Like it's just that political currency that's kind of like this bridge UBI almost, where like the people that haven't joined yet because they're doing whatever, that's how it's kind of used in a sense.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's really about that the entitlements that people have essentially bought into, that are dollar denominated, that those get paid out, and that those have a purchasing power such that they're able to have a dignified life. Now, for everybody else, it's the case that I think the economy is going to be doing so well that it won't take a huge amount of work to have enough purchasing power to live. And so I think that a lot of purchasing power that was driven by technology deflation was siphoned off by the Cantillon effect, right? So today, people's real wages would be much higher than they are if it wasn't for the fact that the whole banking system and political system was designed to extract that wealth and give it to people in New York and DC. So if we move to a system where there's no new dollars being created, all of the existing dollars are backed by Bitcoin, and we're going forward, we're going to have no money printing, then I do think that all of the productivity gains are going to flow to people who are productive. And so there's not really going to be a need for any kind of additional entitlements or UBI type mechanisms, other than just making sure that the people who bought into the system get paid out.
What would you do with Social Security? Like right now, like I think there's what 3 or 4 trillion in the trust there. Like, would you put 10% in Bitcoin, 1%, 50%? Like, what would, if you were in charge of Social Security? I feel like that's coming. Like the Lutnick, these guys, I mean, they got to be looking at that. Like, hey, this is sitting here.
Yeah.
What are we doing? What would you do with it?
So, under the George Bush administration, they did try to quote unquote privatize it, which was okay. Currently, it's invested in U.S. Treasuries, in debt for the government. Essentially, what would it look like if we invested it in stocks? And he got roasted for that because people were like, "Hey, you're gambling with people's retirement and blah 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 blah." So. I think that ultimately the fix will not be at the Social Security level. It'll have to be outside of that, and it'll have to be the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and that essentially, the dollars getting paid out of Social Security, those will ultimately flow from the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it won't be like some kind of reform of the Social Security system beyond just what Doge is doing of, hey, let's see who's getting paid that shouldn't be getting paid.
Oh man, what happens when and we're kind of talking about the dollar not existing in a way, or trying to think of the way to say it, or it's very diminished, right, in value against Bitcoin. It's in essence what we're saying. What like, do you think there's a point where? Do you think there's a point, and or when is the point when people just won't accept fiat currencies? And it could not just a dollar, but really any of them. At what point will people just like, hey, I'm good. I cannot take. You can either trade me your 350 unit apartment complex for your zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, or we got no trade. I'm not taking your paper currency anymore. When does that happen in your mind?
So if we back the dollar with Bitcoin, it will never happen because essentially you'll have one Satoshi equals one Bitcoin, or sorry, one Satoshi equals $1, and they'll be interchangeable. And so you'll go to the supermarket. If you pay with your debit card or credit card, you'll pay in dollars. If you pay with your Lightning wallet, you'll pay in sats. It'll be the same amount. It'll be the same, numeric quantity, and you'll have perfect interoperability between the two. It'll just be a matter of what fits in your brain, because for so many people, and this is something where I wondered about hyperinflation of why do people stick to the currency in a hyperinflation? Well, they're literally like pushing wheelbarrows around and the money is losing half its value in an hour. Like what's going on? People have this mental fixedness, right? They it's like a security blanket for them. They can't let go of the idea that this has no value. And so I think that essentially helping those people by rebranding Bitcoin as the US dollar, and having the US dollar be a thin wrapper around Bitcoin, helps people avoid getting into that hyperinflationary trap. And I think that would be because that would be the worst outcome of, okay, you were grandma living off of Social Security and you go to the grocery store and they say, we don't take dollars anywhere. We only take Bitcoin. Let's find a way to avoid that and, essentially get everybody across this bridge.
It is fascinating, man. Yeah, boy, it is such a fascinating discussion. What are you a believer in hash rate leading price? Are you in that camp?
No, I'm the opposite. I think that hash rate follows price with a bit of a 18-month lag, and that it doesn't just follow Bitcoin price; it also follows ASIC price, so the efficiency of mining rigs, and it also follows electricity prices. So in a world where electricity prices are very low, you have more hash rate than the opposite.
Interesting. I know there's so many people that are in that camp of of hash rate leading price. Um, what are your thoughts on just this demographic shift from the boomers or silent generation and boomers to, we'll say, Gen X and millennials? What do you think this looks like? I mean, for me, there's many bets on Bitcoin. One of it is, hey, the social layer of Bitcoin. These people are the patriots, the 3% in essence of the Revolutionary War. Like, I'm going to put my money on those guys because those guys are going to die on that hill. The social aspect. There's the this demographic shift of like, what are the younger people going to want? Are they going to want gold or silver? Are they going to want these die and paper currencies? So there's many reasons people bet on Bitcoin and save in Bitcoin and say, hey, I'm staking my time and energy in Bitcoin in the network. What does this demographic shift look like for you? Is that how you see it? Like, is it just going to be this like 10, I look at it as a 10-year sunsetting period, like this 10-year shift of the boomers leaving the market and all this wealth coming to the millennial or Gen X, we'll call her millennial. So is that how you kind of see this 10 years, like just this massive Leviathan wave of wealth coming into the younger generations and really coming into the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's going to be a trend because if you look at the survey data, younger people are far more open to Bitcoin than older folks. And so I don't want to discount our boomer Bitcoiners either, right? We got plenty of them. And so I
Very
think
wise.
that
Yeah.
their ranks will continue to grow as well. But yeah, as that wealth gets handed on to the next generation, a greater percentage of it is going to find itself in Bitcoin, and that's going to be a huge tailwind for Bitcoin price going forward.
So I want to transition a little bit. I mean, again, you've been in this game for over a dozen years. You've seen a lot of things, and I want you to give people a perspective of, you know, even like the block size wars. Again, not rehashing that, but like
Yeah.
this fight that has been, that you have seen, and what you think we're going to see going forward. Whether it's we have the EU, they're about to steal their their citizen savings in 6 months or whatever it is. I mean, we could see some 1700s, 18th century type of things, this 250-year cycle, revolutionary cycle kind of happening again. Like what the last 12 years, what you have learned, what does it tell you when you look in the crystal ball of, the further you look in the past, the more you can look into the future type of thing? What do you see? I mean, for instance, again, how fast Bitcoin, and it goes to what you said earlier of, hey, price is doing what it's supposed to do, guys. It's the only free market in the world. It took hundreds of years, just conservatively, probably hundreds of years for gold to assert itself and become that global monetary standard. And here we are 16 years in, and Bitcoin doing its thing, and it's the Trojan horse entering the gates of the government walls here. I would love for you to kind of unpack, again, a little bit what you've seen, but also where you think we're headed when it comes to that.
Yeah, so when I first got really interested in Bitcoin, I thought that it would actually make fiat and dollars obsolete within a year. That it was such an obvious concept that everybody would get on board with it right away, and that it would be game over. Um, what I've learned since is that is not the case. And so while you're right that Bitcoin has grown by leaps and bounds over the past 16 years, I think that it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to exceed the expectations of the skeptics. It's going to continue to underperform relative to our moon math of, we're going to $1 million this year. I also think that all of the people who have predicted that Bitcoin, if this happens or that happens, that Bitcoin will die, I think that's wrong. So, during the block size wars, people were saying, hey, if we don't increase the block size limit, get more payments, Bitcoin's going to die. You'll hear people today say, oh, if Bitcoin doesn't get this upgrade, this new opcode, Bitcoin's going to die. And they're always wrong. I mean, on top of that, when they say if Bitcoin, for example, China banned Bitcoin mining, right? And
Mhm.
Bitcoin did not die. Instead, Bitcoin mining went abroad and went to other countries, including here in the United States. So I think that Bitcoin being anti-fragile is the number one reason why I would never bet against Bitcoin. It's always the case that it's a permissionless open source system, and so anything you throw at it, it's going to find a way to adapt to it and to route around it. Um, that's where I'd say the Bitcoin's history has a lot to teach us. Is that any prediction about Bitcoin failing really has to have a substantial amount of evidence, to back it up, because there's so much evidence to the contrary.
And back to the Trojan horse aspect, we've been talking about price, just surrounding governments and what's going to happen and purchasing power and the dollar and all these things are going to happen. And this is a debate that I know you've had umpteen number of times. So not to rehash the debate necessarily, but just again, for the average person that is, they hear Bitcoin or hear this objection again of, like, oh, you guys are there to diminish government or separate money from state. And here you are, you're a part of the state and you guys are just all for it now. Uh, what do you have to say with the people saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I was not expecting us to succeed this much. And so, look, I'm as surprised as they are, right? It's like, you knock on the door and somebody answers and they invite you in and then they have you at the dinner table. And, it's like, okay, who are we to look a gift horse in the mouth? And so that's my reaction to that. And I think that the amount of success that Bitcoin has had, it's in such stark contrast to the complete failure of gold, for example. Like gold, has been failing downwards in terms of its adoption at the governmental level. So at this point, it's really, it is surprising, but I think we've got to just roll with the punches and continue to press the advantage and run up the scoreboard, right? So while we have one government here in the United States that's very favorable towards Bitcoin, we got to make sure that internationally that continues to happen. We have to get the IMF on board. We've got to get the World Bank, the BIS, all of these institutions that so far they've been pretty lukewarm on Bitcoin. We got to continue orange pilling, and I don't see it as like selling out, in the sense that, look, the Bitcoin itself has not changed, right? And so I think Bitcoin is changing all of these institutions. It's changing these governments and giving them a new set of incentives, which are way better than the old set. And so I think that's how the improvement happens. It's not by us, raging against the machine and being edgy about anarchism that we're actually going to get more liberty for people. I think it's just about finding the ways to continue to educate about Bitcoin, because ultimately Bitcoin's incentives are what changes the behavior of these entities.
Yeah, so beautifully said. Do you think that these entities like the IMF, World Bank, BIS, Bank of International Settlements, etc., do you think that they just die a slow death over time? I mean, like we've been kind of saying, it's not going to like, oh, hey, we're buying Bitcoin and like these things happen. These things don't happen overnight. So do you think this is over the course of 50 years, 100 years, these things just lose there's at the end of the day, there's no point for them eventually. So like, do they just die slow deaths, or what do these entities look like in the future?
They could find a way to keep themselves relevant. They would start by buying Bitcoin. That would be, and so, and that maybe that would actually cause them to adhere to their fundamental, like
Mandates,
why
yeah.
they were founded to begin with. And so, if the IMF really is about, hey, we're going to lend out Bitcoin to developing countries to help them, become independent, that would be great. I can argue against that. If the Bank for International Settlements was like, hey, we're going to help financial institutions all around the world be able to send Bitcoin to each other, hey, great. If they've got, a value add there, then people will use them. Banks will use them. If they don't, banks won't use them. And so I think that it's on them to find how their mission fits into the Bitcoin world and to Bitcoinize themselves. Otherwise, yeah, they'll be disintermediated and they'll become irrelevant over time. Or they'll be replaced by institutions that are better at approaching Bitcoin and having constructive view on it.
What's your biggest idea or thought or belief even that's changed over the last, again, 12, 15 years? What's the thing that I know for some of them, for me, like I wasn't, as a 20-year-old kid, 25-year-old kid, or in college a little bit right before you were, like, I'm not thinking of climate change. I'm not thinking about, and Bitcoin is one of the things, like, I find myself in energy debates and I'm like talking about this and it's like, wow, this really cleans up the environment. And then you're wondering, like, why does no one else who actually said they care about the environment, why aren't they over here actually cleaning up the environment with Bitcoin mining or taking methane out of the atmosphere with Bitcoin mining rigs? So it really exposes who people are and what their actual intentions are. What is something that has really changed you, or Bitcoin has changed about you, or a belief?
Yeah, I was already very cynical about the environmentalist movement when I learned about Bitcoin, so that did not change.
Yeah.
Um, I think
Same.
that what I think changed for me was just seeing the experience of, hey, using these new social media tools that we have on the internet, you can get your message out, and so that's something that I would have thought that we would need to have like official spokespeople to go on mainstream media and to represent Bitcoin. But it turns out that mainstream media has become irrelevant and that you can reach a much bigger audience on YouTube, on Twitter X, on LinkedIn. And so that's changed. On the Bitcoin side, what's changed the most for me was I'd always had this in my mind that people would be interested in making money, and so they would look past the volatility. And so it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's volatile, but it has lots of upside, so that's fine. It turns out though that lots of people either are too risk averse, and so even though they see the upside, they don't their brains cannot handle the 80% drawdown. And so either they panic sell long before that, or they just never get involved at all. Even though they might think Bitcoin's a great idea, financially they can't handle it. The number is too volatile. On the other end, all the people who they understand Bitcoin, they like Bitcoin, but they want to try to find a way to outperform it. And so they are going into Solana and Ethereum. They don't even believe in those things. They'll say, I'm trading to stack more sats. And so it's kind of this bizarre, cynical world. And that's, been surprising to me, and learning from that.
So I was kind of telling you before, I came 2016 or 2016, 2018, just in there. I can't remember exactly. I remember 2016, 2017, really studying stuff. And I think of 2017, 2018, we started buying. And at the same time, I was fortunately buying mainly Bitcoin, but I went down the altcoin path of just like, as a former real estate investor, hockey player turned real estate investor for 10 years, it was just the investor mindset of like, I'm just going to position size and just get a bunch of these because I don't know what's going to play out. My education isn't to that standard yet, to the level yet. And then as it increased over the next couple of years, by 2020, it was very evident and converted everything to Bitcoin. And in saying all this, because you kind of alluded to this, like you're trying to find unit cost bias, there's all these different things that push people into other cryptos. Is that the reason that this keeps coming back up? Like you had to beat off, I don't know how many XRP bots and all kinds of over the last, couple months because of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Why is it that we keep having to deal after years. It's been what, 12 years, I think, for XRP or whatever it's been. Why are these things continually coming back up? What are people not seeing? That there's a lot of people over here that see what's going on, and there's a whole bunch of people that clearly they're blind. They have scales on their eyes for some reason. Why is this a thing still?
Well, I think that they understand that in a vacuum, their altcoin does have more upside than Bitcoin does, because by definition, it's less liquid. And so it definitely can have a run and outperform Bitcoin. And then when that doesn't happen for a while, they dig in and they start rationalizing what it is about their altcoin that makes it fundamentally better than Bitcoin. And so they shift from being kind of the opportunistic trader to being the bag holder. And now they're entrenched in their worldview that, yeah, banks are going to use XRP, all this kind of nonsense. So that, I think, is the root of that psychology. And then, of course, Ripple does great job marketing, right? So they've got all these nice polished websites. They also do a good job of coordinating their community. So they'll post in a forum, hey, here's Pierre's
Engagement
X
farming type
tweet.
stuff.
Can you guys pile on it, and you'll get like 10 XRP or whatever. And so, yeah, it's very mercenary in that way.
It's just wild times. One of the, there's been so many tropes over time too, obviously in memes in the Bitcoin community. And I think of American HODL 6.15. Now it's, as we print more dollars, obviously that the amount of sats that someone can take on right now and purchase obviously gets less than that. So maybe it's 0.21. You can buy a mansion with 0.1 Bitcoin someday. What would you say to people when they say, oh, I missed the boat? Because this makes me think of this. Is why I was just thinking of this and laughing to myself, because they find themselves going into Solana, XRP, Ethereum, et cetera, whatever it might be, Cardano, and they get into these, oh, it's only 10 cents. There's 258,000 sats for every person right now. Is it just a reframing of helping people understand that part of it and the power that gives somebody? I mean, what should the average person focus on right now?
Yeah. So I try to reframe it by telling people, well, you can just buy $20 worth of Bitcoin every week and then just build up a nice nest egg over the long term. And I think that for the average person, that would actually do pretty well. And so the dollar cost averaging and long-term focus kind of shifts it away from get rich quick by, going into a pump and dump. But I also think that human psychology being what it is, a lot of people are looking for a lottery ticket. And so for them, it's like, well, you're just going to learn the hard way. And it's getting harder and harder because the supply of new tokens is far greater than the supply of new adopters. And so on Solana, for example, they've got this feature, Pump.Fun, where you can just spin up a new token really easily and start trading it. And that's, it's a way for people to get educated about the superabundance of cryptocurrencies. We saw it with the president. He came out with his Trump token, and then I don't know if 24 hours passed before there was the Melania token, and so on and so forth. And so there's an infinite number of these tokens. People have to learn the hard way, or a lot of them do, for that matter.
It's so funny you say that, because I had heard that the Melania coin wasn't even the Trump's doing, but which whether it is or isn't, it goes right to your point of like the Solana pump fund or whatever. Like, who knows? Like, it could have been someone just making the meme coin, which is brilliant, I guess, to a large extent, of like, hey, I'm playing around with the back of this, and I don't know if we know if it was actually the Trump thing or someone just went on Solana and made a Melania coin. I mean, it's just wild. Like you say, they're gonna FAFO, right? We're gonna F around and find out. So that's amazing.
Now I have to look that up of was Melania legit or not? I've got a bag of Melania. I want to see it.
Honestly, Pierre, I don't. So every person I've heard talking about it has said that it was a Trump doing, or a Trump offering in essence. I've only heard one or two places, and it was like really early on that people were saying it's not theirs actually, which I immediately accepted in my mind because I thought it was Solana. I thought it was just people jumping on Solana and being like, oh, okay, like I get it, that makes sense. But then everyone that talks about it after since then has said that it was a Trump thing, and I just never looked into it. But to your point, I guess that's why I thought about it, because it could have been whoever just jumping on Solana and making a Melania coin, which is pretty ingenious, actually, if you're one of these, crypto lottery ticket guys. So what in saying all that though, so in this theme of getting SaaS, dollar cost averaging everything, you get this the objection of, well, there's not a fair distribution. We got to go to something else. I mean, this just came up with Jason Calacanis the other day, right? And him saying, oh, I've got the new Bitcoin, and everyone's got the new Bitcoin. And what do you say, where if you're sitting here with Jason and you're on the All In pod, what are you telling Jason Calacanis?
Well, so people have tried to reset things several different ways. One was like Ethereum or Solana of, yeah, we're going to have VCs, we're going to have pre-sale, we're going to have insiders. Another is like WorldCoin of, oh, we're going to distribute this using your biometrics so that we can really get an equal distribution. And I think that if we look at the example of privatization in the former Soviet Union, it's kind of instructive that all the citizens, they got shares of the state-owned companies. And then very quickly, the shares got redistributed in the sense that everybody who needed to put food on the table, they sold their shares for pennies on the dollar to the big players who got all these shares and then became the billionaires. And so I think that if looking at that historical example, we can also look at economic theory, which is the Coase theorem, where Coase basically said it doesn't matter how you initially distribute an asset, as long as you have strong property rights and people can trade the asset, it will very quickly end up in the hands that it's supposed to be in. And so I think that the idea that, oh, if we do a new kind of distribution of Bitcoin, that the end state will be materially different than Bitcoin's end state, I think that's delusional. I think that that's, trying to play God. And so what's much more likely is that, it ends up getting sorted out such that everybody has the amount of Bitcoin that they're supposed to have. And so for, Jason's perspective, he obviously thinks that he should have more Bitcoin than he currently has. Hey, welcome to the club, man. Like everybody else. Yeah, everybody. Man. Even Saylor has said he wishes he had more Bitcoin. That's why he's out in the market buying more Bitcoin. He's not out there. Imagine if Saylor was out there tweeting think pieces about, we need a new Bitcoin. I don't have enough. Like, it's a joke. Just so Jason has the means to go buy more Bitcoin. I know he does. So yeah, that's what he should be doing.
It's such a great point, because I mean, if Saylor was spending all the time doing that, he wouldn't have 500,000 Bitcoin anymore, right? Like he would have way less, because he's spending all his time and energy worrying about reorging Bitcoin or starting a new Bitcoin, which is such a great example of those two dichotomies, that contrast.
Absolutely. Jason's a VC. Like I haven't seen him funding like Bitcoin companies. He could fund a Bitcoin treasury company today, and it would not be as big as Saylor's, but it could be like Metaplanet, just growing as quickly as it can. It's easier to grow when you're smaller, and it's going to be a big market of Bitcoin treasury companies. But I think that it takes humility to accept that you missed the boat, but not really, because it's going to continue to go up. So get on.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, I love that you just said that, because it just, everyone thinks it's like this IQ test. And I always think of it as an ego humility test. That's really what Bitcoin is at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's.
Yeah, lots of very smart people are like, oh, I'm going to create a better Bitcoin they don't realize that they're resetting all the network effects, and that in monetary economics, network effects are critical. And so that's why I think that Ethereum has been underperforming relative to Bitcoin. It's all about the network effects of liquidity.
Boy, oh boy, yeah, Ethereum. That's a whole can of worms right there. Boy, speaking of that, in a sense, I mean, it's not directly related, but somewhat tangential, I guess. What are your thoughts on that? The mempool has been pretty cleared out the last little while. What are your, this is something that a year or two ago, a couple of years ago, everyone's screaming and crying, and look, it's always the there's too many transactions and the fees are too high. So it's, like you said earlier, in a way, like Bitcoin's broken, it's going to break. And then now it's like, well, miners can't get along now. How, the mempool is clear. I thought we never see the mempool clear again. Is this just TikTok next block? This is Bitcoin doing its thing and just kind of always doing the opposite of what everyone thinks it's going to do.
Yeah, maybe. I think that I've heard somebody say that, like, with Bitcoin transaction fees going up, Bitcoin becomes this expensive Rolex, and only rich people will be able to transact on chain. And then I thought to myself, well, hold on, rich people, they transact on Coinbase because they have access to a fiat bank account, they have access to a brokerage account, so they're buying like the ETF and MicroStrategy. They have access to lawyers and accountants, so they don't really worry about like getting scammed or defrauded. And so, in my mind, on-chain Bitcoin is for poor people.
Hold up. Over 90% of people that watch this channel don't subscribe to the channel. And we see that metric across all of Bitcoin YouTube and financial YouTube, sound money YouTube. That is crazy. Let big tech know that people want what they are getting here. They want sound money education. They want more truth. We do that by subscribing, and it also gives more resources to the content creators to provide more for you. I'm a consumer as well. I love watching this. This is why I give back. It's a calling inside, but I also learned so much over the last 15 years from YouTube that I want to give back to the community that gave so much to me. So I thank you more than you know. Please subscribe. Please subscribe to the other channels. Now back to the episode.
It's for people who don't have access to a bank account, and who, it's just easier for them to open up a wallet than it is to open up a Coinbase account. And so on-chain fees being low makes sense that they can afford it. And even if the on-chain fees were a little higher, they can use Lightning and, open and close channels just occasionally and save money that way. But I really think that on-chain is all about, it's about trust minimization, right? And so if you live in a low trust society where you literally, like there's no financial institutions because everybody's always scamming each other, far worse than here in the United States, then yeah, okay, it makes economically rational sense for you to use on-chain Bitcoin. If you live in a high trust society where if you try to scam, you end up like Sam Bankman-Fried in jail, then the game theory says that it's a very high cost to being a bad actor, and so it does make more sense to use custodial services, and that seems like it's very contrarian to Bitcoiners, but I think that's the reality on the ground, and that's. Saylor got a lot of grief when he said that, oh, there's like these paranoid crypto anarchists who like they only want to self-custody. And I'm like, well, he's not wrong. Like I like self-custody because I'm paranoid, not because I'm actually making a rational risk assessment here. Coinbase has been custodying Bitcoin ever since I've been in Bitcoin, for the past 10 years. They've been custodying Bitcoin. What I don't like about Coinbase isn't that they are going to get hacked and that their private keys are going to get stolen by an insider or by a third party. It's just that a Coinbase account is easier to compromise than a hardware wallet. And so that to me is like the pragmatic outlook on it, not, oh, the government is going to seize everybody's Coinbase account, 6102 style. And so, that's why you shouldn't use Coinbase. It's like, no, you shouldn't use Coinbase because phishing a Coinbase account. I just got a phishing email just yesterday from my Coinbase account, and it looked so real. But the only reason I thought it wasn't real was because essentially I was like, okay, it sounds like they're trying to get access to my Coinbase account here, and having worked at Kraken, I kind of had a lot of security training, but that is easier to hack than a hardware wallet. So I think that's the strongest argument. But there's lots of people who are not tech savvy. Hardware wallets continue to be problematic in many different technical ways, where it's a little hard for people to wrap their minds around and use it. So yeah, I think that as the technology improves, hardware wallets, for example. So here's what I want to see. You can use 3 different kinds of hardware wallets. Let's say a Trezor, a Ledger, and a Cold Card, directly with Bitcoin Core, so that you're not using any third-party software. You just plug it in, and that you can set up a multi-sig that degrades over time, so that it starts out as 3 of 2, and then after 6 months it becomes 2 of 2, and then after 6 months it becomes 1 of 1. That way, if you lose a hardware wallet, you can still access your Bitcoin. If you lose 2 hardware wallets, you just have to wait longer, and then you can access your Bitcoin. That kind of security model that adds the redundancy, I think that could get people more comfortable with self-custody than the existing solutions.
So you mentioned the 6102, and I wanted to touch on that really quick. So you preempted that. Obviously, again, whether it's the older generations or just, it doesn't even matter. It's not even the older generations. It's really everybody. I mean, I remember I wasn't a computer guy necessarily, but I think the first time I heard of Bitcoin was maybe 2014, 2015. It took me a year or two to really start looking into it, because I was kind of like, and that's like a 25, 30-year-old guy at the time, 20, must've been 25 or whatever, around there, early 20s. And so like pretty tech savvy, not a computer scientist, but it is a real thing. So it's how are we combating that to make it more accessible for the average person? In saying that, you kind of alluded to it, you're gonna have these centralized pots of Bitcoin, honeypots, just wherever, around the earth, really. So do you have fear of a 6102 type of thing, or how do we combat that? Is it education, just time? Like, how do we combat that, I guess, so that we make sure those things don't happen?
Yeah. So if we look at how it went down with Bitcoin mining, for example, the whole Biden administration wanted to ban Bitcoin mining here in the US. It got fought off by the big Bitcoin miners. And it wasn't like the small Bitcoin miners who are like mining in their garage. They can't go and hire a lobbyist. That would be way too expensive, right? So I do think that having those large honeypots essentially means that we have big stakeholders who will engage in the political process and fend off a 6102 using the political process, right? And so I think that's one dynamic. The other is just the low cost of opting out. And so like with gold, there was a high cost of opting out and a high cost of securing your own gold or of moving it around that you don't have with Bitcoin. So I think that ultimately the 6102, it's kind of a game theory thing where if the government knows that it's going to be hard to enforce, they're just not going to bother. And they're certainly going to have a much lower upside than with gold. And so that means that at the slightest amount of lobbying resistance, they're just not going to go forward with it. And so I'm optimistic that Bitcoiners will continue to control the government, at least here in the United States. And so we're not at risk of a 6102. If we do become at risk of one, then it's just important to be engaged in the political process or to flee the country, right? And just
Yeah.
pack up your bags and go to El Salvador or whatever it is.
I would like to, and this is a perfect segue again, the centralization risk. So we kind of talked about government, honeypots, 6102 stuff there. What are your thoughts of just the mining pools, centralization possibilities, things that people are working on? How can we mitigate these risks of getting too centralized in that realm?
I think it's FUD. I think that it's completely overblown. And I think that because at the end of the day, the whether it's with custody or nodes or mining, the reason why it's decentralized is because anyone can do it. And so even if you're in a situation where, let's say, for example, the let's take the most absurd scenario where the year is 2200, there is zero new Bitcoin being mined, right? So there's no subsidy anymore. That ended 60 years before in 2140. And there is basically no transaction fees, either because they're so cheap that it doesn't really add up to much, or everybody is using Bitcoin in layer 2 through 21 scaling technologies, and so there's just nothing basically happening on layer 1. And there's one guy in his underwear in his parents' basement with a Pentium 4 laptop, and he is mining. And he is the only one that is producing blocks for the Bitcoin network. And he decides to start censoring your transactions. And so what you would do in that scenario is that you would just start bidding up your transaction fees so that you're incentivizing somebody else to come in and mine your transactions. Or you yourself get in the game and start mining your transactions. And there would be no way for the guy in his underwear to stop you from doing that. That's the beauty of Bitcoin mining, is that it's permissionless. And so it's an open set. The incumbents cannot stop new competition from coming in. That is materially different from proof of stake. In proof of stake, the other stakers have to approve you joining the stake. And so it's a very different dynamic. And that's where I just don't buy any of the concerns about centralization, because I always fall back to, well, let's look at the worst possible scenario. 100% centralization, and yet it's completely anti-fragile. So where's the problem? And that's the conclusion I've come to on that.
So you just talked about it briefly, but do you think 5, 10, 50 years from now, do you think you'll walk into a home and have a lot of people with home miners, their saunas or whatever, their hot tubs mining, their hot water heater? Like, what do you think it'll look like in the future when it comes to personal mining?
I like that vision a lot. I just wonder if it'll ever really make a ton of economic sense, in the sense that, a normal heater is optimized for generating heat. A Bitcoin mining rig is not. And there's just trade-offs, right, between the two technologies. So I like the concept and having crossover, but I'm not super bullish on that personally. I know that there's really good people working on making it happen, and I hope that they succeed. But to me, like, the mining economics have gotten worse and worse over time. It's hyper competitive. It's a global commodity that is being produced. Hash rate is. So yeah, I guess I'm not super bullish on it.
What do you see? So opposite in the spectrum here, because personal miners, people, Jerry down the street's not doing nuclear mining. So what do you see with nuclear and in that world? Because we touched on that earlier a little bit with you kind of started tapping into, we didn't pull on the thread very much, but the incentives of this world where what Bitcoin does, and the standard of living will be so much higher. It's hard for us to grapple with robotics and AI and what's going to happen, that we can't even grapple with the amount of work we will be able to get done because of all this technology, and it will enable us to have a higher standard of living. So is nuclear going to play a big part in Bitcoin mining in your perspective? How do you kind of see that shaping up?
Yeah, I think that it could potentially be a source of free electricity. And so there's varying sources for that. There will always be the challenge of demand for electricity is cyclical. So during the summer, people need more electricity to cool their homes. During the winter, people need more electricity to heat their homes. And so any kind of mining operation has to take that into account, that they're going to have to turn off in those seasons and then, go full throttle in between. I don't think that it'll ever make I don't think it'll ever make sense to build a nuclear power plant for the sole purpose of Bitcoin mining. Because the revenue per megawatt is just too low compared to the cost of building a nuclear power plant.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you see just in general, how it's going to shape the global energy infrastructure? I mean, you're very hands-on with Texas and what's going on there, and you could even allude to that. Actually, we don't necessarily need to go to a worldwide perspective, but let's talk about that. Actually, let's talk about Texas instead. So what you guys are doing there, helping stabilize the grid, mining, again, doing things to clean up the environment, actually. So if people are actually concerned about the environment, well, here you go. What is Texas? What does that look like, and what you guys are doing now down there? I'd love for you to unpack that for a minute and just enlighten people on what's actually happening with Bitcoin mining down where you are.
Well, I left Riot a couple of weeks ago, but I'm happy to talk about kind of the mining industry here in Texas, which is that Texas is blessed with three natural resources in abundance, which are wind, sun, and natural gas. And that those actually work really well in a complementary way in the energy system to balance things out. With the exception of in the evening when the sun is setting and it's hot outside and the wind has not picked up yet. So it's windy at night and it's sunny during the day, but there's a window of time between those two where you have a gap. And so you can fill that gap with turning on a natural gas power plant, which is kind of annoying because by the time you turn it on, you basically have to turn it off. You can do that using batteries. So there's been a huge growth of grid scale batteries here in Texas. There, the cost is that, batteries are expensive. And of course, Bitcoin mining. So what the Bitcoin miners do is that they turn off during those peak times, and they do it in a way that's economically rational because the real-time price of electricity goes from $20 a megawatt to $5,000 a megawatt. And their break even for Bitcoin mining might be around $100 a megawatt. And so that's kind of a natural market process to incentivize Bitcoin miners to balance the grid.
Incredible. What are you, in transition a bit here, what are you most excited about when it comes to Bitcoin? Is it, Fediments? Is it, the layer 2, 3 scaling? What's going on? I would love for you to touch on what really has you geared up going forward. I know you've got some stuff. Like you said, you left Riot. You got some things that you're working on. What are you most excited about moving forward here?
Yeah, I think that getting more Bitcoin adoption through the financial system is critical for essentially getting to the next level for Bitcoin. And so, once you reach a 1.5 trillion market cap, as much as I love the plebs, our $20 DCA is not going to move the needle. What we need to do is get these massive pools of capital that are locked into products that, frankly, are underperforming, and to move them onto the Bitcoin standard. And so I think that Saylor's done a masterful job as showing how we can do that. And it's just about scaling it up and getting lots of other products out there that are backed by Bitcoin so that we can continue on the adoption of Bitcoin beyond just people who, have the technical savvy or have the risk appetite to hold Bitcoin as it is. It seems like that is tapped out in the sense that, adoption is going to slow down if we don't find ways of transmuting Bitcoin into formats that lots of more investors can access and benefit from. So that's what I'm excited about.
Do you think that the U.S. again? I was talking to Samson about this the other day briefly, and he was just saying that he thinks there's a lot of capital that's going to be moving into Bitcoin once the U.S. figures out their strategy, whether it's the Lummis bill or whenever they get their heads around this, whether it's a month from now or 6 months from now or whatever it is. But that's when things really start unlocking. Is that kind of how you see it too? Does it feel like to you like a lot of people around the world just kind of waiting for the US to make the move?
I think so. I think there's an open question about, will the US actually accumulate Bitcoin, or are they just not going to sell what they've seized? And that the market doesn't really buy, and other governments don't really buy the press release of we're working on it. They want to see the proof of work of actually buying. So there's that. I definitely think that there's still going to be lots of governments around the world who look at what the US does and say, yeah, okay, but that's Donald Trump. And so they're kind of going to discount it through that lens of, okay, this person is eccentric and they're, doing something off the beaten path, which is according, it's on brand for Trump. Yeah. But it's not persuasive for some other government that is more conventional. And, obviously that's to their detriment, but the US is going to lead on this for sure.
What are your quick thoughts on just the EU? And they seem like they're just downward spiral in so many ways. It's really remarkable what they're doing over there. And when it pertains to specifically, we'll say the savings, they're going to take the savings out of their citizens' accounts. They got 10 trillion sitting in accounts. And I know they telegraphed this a few years ago. I mean, obviously at the Cyprus event, 12, 13, whatever it was, 13 years ago. And then you have this, a couple of years ago, they said the same thing, like, oh, there might be a bail-in, which ironically our FDIC has said here as well, that they could potentially do that. I remember a few years ago, that was a viral video, like 3 years ago, that they're like, oh, the banks are really unstable. We can't tell anyone that. It was like someone had the leaked, it wasn't even leaked actually. It was like a 3-hour thing, a symposium. And then some Bitcoiners, I think, had the weaponized octus had pulled out a couple of minutes of clips and I'm just like laughing in the background, like, yeah, these banks aren't safe, but don't tell anybody. Where do you kind of see this shaking out in the EU and what they're doing over there between trying to tax self-custody? I know Tour de Meester has been really touching on this, a lot of European Bitcoiners. Where do you see things kind of shaking out here for the EU and the Eurozone?
Yeah, I think that ultimately they're on a very bad path because they have, and this is why my family left France, was that they have a very stifling culture from a perspective of innovation and entrepreneurship and economic growth. And so combine that with a very generous welfare state and increased need to build up a military because, they're concerned about Russia. So how do they pay for all that? It sounds like they don't really have a solid mechanism for paying for it other than stealing more money from their citizens. Which I imagine at some point they just drive everybody out of the country, out of the continent, and people will try to find countries that are more welcoming towards capital. So they're going to decapitalize themselves, and it's really sad. I mean, it's obviously a beautiful continent, lots of culture. I like visiting myself, but it's on a bad path. Maybe they will essentially have a political change, and that we'll have a different conversation in a few years. But right now, it doesn't look great.
It's really remarkable. What are your thoughts on just, state, obviously, like I said earlier, touched on it briefly. We talked about nations, we talked about states a bit, you in the legislature and what you guys are doing down in Texas. What about city level? Have you given any thought to just city level? Because I was just thinking about my small town here over the last month, and I'm just like, dang, if we can get some Bitcoin in the balance sheet here in the local municipality, I mean, you got people around the world funding your government and funding, making sure that you're well capitalized. Have you given, any length of thought on just local municipalities taking on Bitcoin?
I haven't. Even at the state level, it kind of came out of nowhere that after seeing Donald Trump speak in Nashville, that the state legislators thought that it would be a good idea to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so I think that, adoption always happens in quirky ways where you have one person who is kind of leading the way. I haven't seen anything at the local level, but it would make sense to have that. Just seems like it's a matter of leadership.
What are you? So you and Bitstein have been getting the Nakamoto Institute, reviving that. You've got the pod, incredible stuff there. What else do you have that you're working on that you would love to touch on? I know everyone's excited about that. Obviously, I have to mention that you guys are doing that. So what was the emphasis on really kind of re-kickstarting things there, and then please touch on, if you can, you might not be able to talk about what the new stuff you have kind of coming up, but I would love for you to touch on any of that stuff if you could.
Yeah. So Michael Goldstein, aka Bitstein, founded the Nakamoto Institute. It was kind of dormant for a little while because the content was just up there and people could just access it, and it wasn't, kind of being actively managed. But he's decided to kick it back up and to do a redesign. So he completed the redesign of the Nakamoto Institute to kind of refresh the website and to add lots more content, add translations. Bitcoin being a global phenomenon does require that we translate all of these OG writings into all the different world's languages. And then, of course, the podcast, right? Bitcoin needs more podcasts. So he started the reorg, which goes back and looks at early writings from the Nakamoto Institute and providing commentary on those, seeing what held up the test of time, what did not age well, etc. So it's really, really entertaining listen. As for myself, I'm starting a new company. I'll have more information about that next week. I'll actually be making a public announcement. And I'm excited about launching that.
Incredible stuff. Thank you so much, Pierre. I appreciate you. Appreciate you for being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. We need many more of them. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, Brandon. Have a good one.
If you're anything like me and you can't get enough of the sound money, freedom go up, number go up technology that is Bitcoin, then you can binge on this playlist right here where we have all of our most recent interviews like George Bodine, Top Gun graduate, How You Can Retire on 0.1 Bitcoin, Larry Lepard, Samson Mao, James Lavish, Eric Kason, Rajat Soni, Peter Dunworth, and many, many more. You're not going to want to miss this playlist here. Happy binging. We'll see you inside.